This is Jackie Helvey, and I'm here in rural Orange County with my longtime friend Jeffery Beam. Hey, Jeffrey.
Hey, Jackie. Thank you for coming to see me.
Oh, I'm just so thrilled about your new book. Hold up the cover and tell folks the name.
The name is Verdant. It's a collection of poems with a sort of an essay in the back that talks about the origins of the poem.
Yeah, I found that very interesting. So tell folks a little bit about yourself. And I know you've written many, many books. How long have you been writing poetry?
I started writing in the 5th grade.
Oh, did you really?
And I'm turning 69 next month. So that was a long time ago.
Wow.
One of my favorite stories about that is when I graduated from high school. I grew up in Kannapolis, North Carolina. And it was a city school system, and there was only one high school at that time. And I was in high school in the early 70s, graduating in 71. And so I graduated with people who I had been in school with since the 1st grade.
Right.
And a young woman who had not been close to since elementary school probably, came up and said, "I remember the first poem you wrote."
No kidding.
And I said, no, you don't. But I was sort of, everybody thought of me as a poet already.
Uh-huh.
So she recited the first poem to me.
Wow, it must have had a huge impact on her.
It was amazing to think, I knew already that I had a reputation of writing poetry and stuff. But from the 5th grade to the 12th grade, she had remembered this sweet little poem. You ready?
That's amazing.
If I were a starfish, I would make a wish.
That's it?
That's it. So easy to remember, but nevertheless, I just thought, wow, that's really lovely.
That is. So that probably made you think, well, there must be something to this, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so from there?
From there, my first book was published, it was mostly written as an undergraduate student at UNC Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
It was not published until about a year after I moved here, because I moved here in 75 from the Charlotte area, Kannapolis area.
Now, did you move here to continue your education, or were you already done by then?
Well, I never wanted to go to graduate school. I was such a head in the air artist that I thought if I ended up going to graduate school, it would kill my creativity.
Right.
And I didn't want to teach because I thought that would kill my creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was going to be the next T.S. Eliot, of course. And so I was married at the time to a woman. So we moved here. She got a job at the university, and I started looking for a job. And about 8 months later, I got a job at UNC Libraries, which is where I worked my entire working career for 35 years.
Wow, that's wild. You must have really liked it there.
Oh, I loved it. I had worked in libraries from about the 5th grade all the way through junior high, high school. In college and undergraduate school, I worked in bookstores. So I'd always been around books, and it seemed like the natural place to be. And it was wonderful to be working in a library where I had books at my fingertips all the time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was good. That was wonderful. Somebody asked me recently. I frequently will say, they'll say, "How many books have you written?" I'll say over 20, which is true. But some of those are small press things, limited edition things.
Right.
But this book I'm saying is my 15th major book.
Right.
So, a complete whole, not really fat, but a complete book.
Right. And you, I think one of the interesting things about your career is that you don't just write poetry and then, it's just a poem. You combine it with other forms of art and you just take it up a few notches.
Well, that was actually a result of my undergraduate education in part. As a freshman and a sophomore at UNC Charlotte, I was an English major. indeed thought I was going to teach English, but I was also a writing student. But I really was not very content. I didn't like my poetry professor. We had sort of different ideas about what poetry was about and for. And they started an art program, which was an experimental program in the state, in a public school, a program that was inspired by Bennington College and Black Mountain College. Very open, self-directed, sort of self-study projects, which was supposed to be, in music and theater and dance and painting and sculpture and pottery and all that kind of stuff. Writing was not supposed to be a part of it, but I was going to drop out of school. And I went to the chair of this new program and I said, why can't a writer be part of this program? And he said, I don't see any reason why not. So, my junior year, I became part of the art department.
Oh,
And
that's fantastic.
Part of that program was that you had to create a project every semester that was collaborative with other disciplines. So you couldn't just sit around and write poetry. You had to find some theater people to work with, some dance people to work with, some painters, whatever. You had to conceive of a project in which you not only collaborated with these people in other disciplines, but also did that. So
Right.
you sang, you danced, you whatever
Oh,
as
wow.
well. So I was dancing my poetry with other dancers and other writers.
That's so cool.
Ended up a few more writers came to the program after the first year I was in it. So when I started reading my poems in public, I'd also already seen Allen Ginsberg perform and a number of other really famous poets. But Ginsberg, I saw at Davidson College in 1972, I think it was. And he was in his high hippie days with his love beads and his long hair and his accordion and his other musical instruments and his pot, smoking on the stage at Davidson College, reciting his poems,
Wow.
ripping off his clothes. And I thought, now that's what I've been learning in this program, but here I am, I'm seeing it in action for somebody that's not in a class,
Right.
that's living it. And from then on, I thought, whatever I do, I want all of these other disciplines to be as much a
included.
part of it as possible. So, for me, a book has to be really beautiful. This is a gorgeous book. So it has to be a work of art as well as the poems. And frequently I've collaborated with visual artists. There have been 7 or 8 composers who have set my poems to music. I've set some of my own poems to music. So there's this, any way I can find to bring in other disciplines, that's
Right.
always been important to me.
It must be very fulfilling to hear your poetry sung.
Oh man,
know?
it is such a treat. The first group of poems that were set to music, aside from something I had done myself, were done by a very famous composer, and it all takes place in a beehive. And this was a result of a book that came out that a friend in New York said, we should get you a reading in New York. This was 1998 or something. And I said, nobody in New York knows me or cares to know me. And I tried to get a reading for this book. No luck. She said, oh, I can do it. And that failed. But then she said, I'll bring you through the back door. So she commissioned this set of 5 songs. And so those were the first songs that were poems that were set to music by somebody other than me. The poems were written already.
Right.
But I can remember the composer, his name was Lee Hoiby. He's gone now, but I remember being here one Saturday morning vacuuming and the phone rings and it's him, and he has somewhat completed one of the songs, and he wants me to listen to it over the phone and is asking my opinion of it. And I'm thinking, why ask me my opinion? I'm like falling on the ground in joy and ecstasy because
Right.
it's so incredibly beautiful. And then to hear, people not only play music inspired by the poems, but to sing the words.
Right.
I mean,
How
it
great.
has never gotten old. I just finished working with another composer who has taken poems from my book that was published in 1995, and it's called this series of songs is called A Garden of Flowers. They're all sort of flower poems. And I have yet to hear it. I've just sort of heard a computer version of the music, but not an actual performance of the songs. But I mean, just hearing that little bit, the anticipation of what are the songs going to sound like.
Right. Well, will you read a couple of poems
Sure.
for us?
Sure.
Because you are so great. Your reading is so wonderful.
So that I'm not much of a narrative poet in that, some people can write a single poem that will take you through a whole day's experience or something. I'm heavily influenced by Asian poetry, and particularly in this book, there's a tradition of ancient Asian poetry which involves devotion to the divine, which is expressed in poems that are written to one's beloved.
Right.
And there's also a tradition in poetry all over the world that falls into that. But there are certain poems that the Russian poet Anna Akhmatova wrote, and poems that Edna St. Vincent Millay wrote that sort of inspired this collection too. Back to Asian, you've probably heard of Rumi, which is sort of Middle Eastern, near the Near East, but also Mirabai and Kabir. These are all poets in that tradition. So this book takes you from spring all the way, from summer all the way to the following spring. So you go through winter. I have fallen in love with a much younger person, much to the detriment of, at that time, my 15-year relationship, which now that person, my husband, will be celebrating our 42nd year in May.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
But
quite an accomplishment.
I left my husband, Stanley, my partner at that time,
For a fling.
for a fling, for my midlife crisis, which I like to call my midlife opportunity. So these, as I was coming out of that crisis, I realized that I wanted to write some poems sort of entrenched in these traditions, this Asian tradition of erotic religious poetry, if you want to call it that, or erotic spiritual poetry is probably a better term. So you see in the poems me going through first just the obsession with this young man, and then as you go through the seasons, you also follow my devotion transferring from this individual to the great divine. And as that happens, I find myself again. I find my wholeness again. I find my way back to not being crazy, because I was pretty crazy at the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's see. Now, one of the poems in this book has been set to music.
Oh, cool.
I don't know if you've heard of something called Family Secrets, and there's a singer, an opera singer in our area, Andrea Moore Healy, who grew up in this area. Shannon Healy, who
Oh, yeah, I know Shannon.
from Crooks, is her husband. So she's known as a singer. She's known as Andrea Moore, but she created a work with a North Carolina composer, Daniel Thomas Davis, which is called Family Secrets, and a bunch of mostly Orange County writers wrote the text for this series of songs, which is a sort of a tiny staged operetta, I guess is what you would call it, which is all about family secrets in a southern home, so to speak. So, although this poem is part of my story, it was taken as part of that story.
Right.
Which, I mean, really pretty much tells the same theme, you know, love and the pains and beauties and stresses of love. How peaceful the porch swing on summer evenings when heat takes on a shimmering coolness. How I sit to watch and listen. Faint music's shimmy from the neighbors. Cars whiz by like carousel horses. How startling the sun sinks into the maple trees' fired leaves. Oncoming silence, sweet and deafening. Perfect for remembering and forgetting. You will return, or will your absence become coolness? This sweet and deafening silence.
I love that.
So, and
That was one of my favorite.
it stands alone very well. I mean, some of them are so integral to the sequence that alone they don't stand quite as well as that one does. But it's really wonderful to hear the song too. I think you can hear it on
bet
Facebook.
so.
On in Family Sequence, it's called Porch Song, but you can hear her sing it. And what I love about that song is it has banjo in it. I have never thought. Most of my songs have been very classical, and this is sort of a classical song, but to have banjo in it, I thought was just the most amazing thing. But this is the second poem in the book, so it actually starts with this beloved young man already gone, and I'm coming out of this crisis, sort of reliving these moments, and coming back to myself. You told me your heart was a sieve, as if to force me into condemnations. Instead, I praised your wisdom, your brown eyes dancing, your blue-black hair smoking up our nights. Summer welcomes me again. I walk out, skin crying. Neighbors watching my restless solitude. You thought you owned me, but I know now, suffering alone possesses me. So, at this point I'm pretty miserable, and trying to find a way.
Yeah, I thought a few of those were a little dark.
Yeah, I mean, they are dark, and well, for me, where are we going to go if we can't face the darkness that's in front of us?
Right.
And
you got to see the darkness in order to appreciate the light, right?
And you can't grow unless you accept whatever your failures are, or what pains you've experienced, what losses you've had. I mean, this is a theme that has always been in my poetry. There's a poem from another book that talks about how, I don't want to write the perfect poem. I only want to write the imperfect poem, like the human.
Right.
And that's always important to me. It's interesting because people have said a couple comments have been given to me about, gosh, there's all this sort of beautiful imagery, and all of a sudden this sort of dark thing comes into the poem. And I said, well, I mean, I was crazy.
Yeah, that's where you were
I was
at
being
the time.
torn between all this beautiful, wonderful stuff and these great sinking spells and pains and tears. And I mean, I did have a serious breakdown at the point where I started coming out of it. But I mean, a very serious breakdown. So I mean, it was dark. Let's see, maybe we can find something a little more positive. So ultimately, in the poem sequence, one of the places that I find solace, which has always been true of me, is out in nature, in the garden, in the woods, whatever. And so this is a poem about, I guess we're just into late winter. Spring is just starting to appear again. So my soul is sort of waking back up, and I'm finding comfort and happiness again.
Right.
But interesting enough, this poem also reflects back to my experiences as a child. I spent a lot of time outdoors as a child too, and that's where I would go for comfort. I had this favorite mimosa tree that I would climb into the top of, and
I
would
read
sit
that
up
and thought,
there,
woo!
and I would sing to myself, and I would read to myself, and I would talk to the birds. I mean, I was a kooky little child. It was great. So this sort of reflects on that, you know. In a way, I found myself again when I started reflecting back on this child who knew the purity of the earth, so to speak. I am thankful where many ferns are. How tough the black root masses covering stretches pale and shaggy, leaning toward the sun without regret. How perfectly the wild, poor ground shelters cheerfulness, sodden drippings, cold mist. When I was a child, I learned how good a thing shade is. The sound of it, the same note repeated, a secret nothing. Observing things that escape strong, long-sighted people. So that reflects on my feeling that, you know, we don't look enough at the small things in front of us, where the shady, you know, under the shade of the tree where there might be some beautiful wildflower growing or whatever. Right. But also in our lives, we want everything to be beautiful and bright and perky, but you actually can find brightness and happiness in what might seem like a dark and shady part of your life if you start looking there.
Right.
You know, in the poems, I get to a point where I sort of do this witchcraft, and I take this lover's name and I write his name backwards to unspell it.
I read that too. That was interesting.
You know, and I said, you know, that's the least you deserve, but it's also the most you deserve. Because, you know, my heart was broken, so I was also reflecting on a broken heart and how can I get this person out of my system? So, you know, do a little bit of witchcraft, you know, write his name backwards, and the spell is broken. So again, I'm finding healing again. Broken hearts littering the world, holes in the garden, holes in the heart. Grief, wonderful gift as long as it's not made a habit. Forgive me for wounds I've given you. I wanted to plant flowers in you, not thorns. I've learned to live with tensions. A monk making love to God alone in his cell. Blaming no one, not even you. Thankful for the place to burn and cool. Everyone grieves with me. Are already knitting the holes with their love. Listen, I can hear their needles threading and moving. So, you know, by unspelling him, I've gotten to a place where I can now forgive him for whatever he's done, forgive myself for whatever I've done.
Right.
And also what happens then is I'm open to all the love and support that all the people around me are giving me.
Right.
I mean, not just...
I really love that
not just
poem.
friends, but, you know, the therapist I were going to. I went through 3 therapists during this time. And I had a Vedic teacher, you know, ancient Indian philosophy teacher during this time. So all of these people are these people that I imagine, you know, with their needles and threads sort of sewing up the broken heart. You know, you can't heal a broken heart, but you can sort of stitch it into a sort of a healed place. Right. I'm glad you like that poem. I like that poem a lot too.
Well, now if people want to find your books, you have a lot of books, and learn about where your readings are going to be and things like that, where should they go?
Flyleaf has some books now. They have 3 titles online, I think, right now. And Purple Crow in Hillsborough has, I think, most of my books.
Okay.
Horse and Buggy Press in downtown Durham has many of my books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Regulator has some in stock also.
And your website address
Is jeffreybeam.com. That's
Mm-hmm.
ERYBEAM.com. You are my webmaster. So there you go. I don't have a calendar on my web page, which probably I should. But if you Google my name, you'll pull up. There's a reading actually this Saturday at Tom Stevens's gallery in downtown Hillsborough.
Oh, I've never been there. Where is that?
West King Street. I can't tell you the exact address, but it's sort of across the street from Purple Crow Books.
Okay.
Is it Cup of Joe that's right next door? I think is
Probably.
Anyway, there's reading there. Wine and Cheese. It's at 6 o'clock. Then I don't remember the date of the one at Flyleaf, but if you go to the Flyleaf website and look up, I'll be sharing the reading there with a good friend, David Need, who is a poet from Durham who has done translations of the German poet Rilke. He'll be reading his Rilke translations. And then there's also a reading at Horse and Buggy in Durham, which is later in April. So the Flyleaf and the Horse and Buggy are in April. I think it's the 15th. Maybe it's the 8th at a Flyleaf and the 15th at Horse and Buggy, but double check that, folks, because I probably have that wrong.
Okay.
There may be other readings in the fall. I have a good friend in Virginia that has a book coming out in the fall, and we thought we might approach some of the other local bookstores in Raleigh and Durham and Greensboro to do readings together there.
Well, that sounds great. And it is so good to see you and
It's
so
wonderful to see you.
great to read and hear you recite your poetry because it's beautiful and you are beautiful and I'm so happy you're my friend.
Well, you are equally as beautiful. I'm so glad, despite not doing the radio show, that you are still out there engaging people because you're so good at it.
Oh, thank you, Jeffrey.
You are.
Continued success.
Thank you.